Greetings and a warm welcome from me, astrologer Patrick Arundell. Today, in the latest of my deep dive videos, I'm going to explore the retrograde journey of Jupiter in the sign of Taurus, which begins on September the 4th, but goes through to the final day of year 2023. I'll give you the exact timings, also the degrees of where the retrograde begins and where it gets to. I'm going to explore Jupiter's themes of its rulership of Sagittarius, of Pisces, but how it's been impacting on Taurus, but what we can expect through this retrograde. I'll share with you the natal event chart. There's something very interesting there regarding Saturn, because Saturn's in house 2, very redolent of the energy of Taurus, which is where Jupiter is, along with the more free-spirited energies of Uranus. But also I'll share with you the solar event chart so we can all collectively relate to what this means. The upcoming aspects, there's some really powerful ones towards the end of October, a whole a wallop of energy going between the signs of Taurus and Scorpio, which is really going to be interesting. And then I'm going to share each of the 12 zodiac signs from Aries through to Pisces. So please do stay with me for those. If you are a new visitor here, thank you so much for joining me. This is very much a community. If you have any thoughts, please share them. I do try to interact with each one. If you're a returning visitor or a subscriber, thank you so much for your support. It means so much. If you've yet to subscribe, I'd be honoured if you did so now. And please do like and share the video too. Now, I'd just like to share with you a very exciting opportunity. Year 2023 is absolutely racing by, and the new year is speeding towards us. If you order your personal forecast for year 2024 now, based on your unique birth data, I'll prepare the rest of year 2023 free of charge. Plus, in my 30% off package, you can get your character analysis report, your life roadmap. Understanding this will give you a much more intimate understanding of how patterns have played out in your existence so far. Please see the link beneath this video for more. And finally, if you've yet to watch your year 2024 Zodiac deep dive forecast, you can see the link for that beneath this video too. So Jupiter begins its retrograde on the 4th of September at 15 degrees and 34 minutes. There's a wonderful precision in its retrograde because it rewinds exactly 10 degrees to 5 degrees and 34 minutes in Taurus. But the process begins at 2:10 and 44 seconds PM on the 4th, and Jupiter's rewinding for 17 weeks or 119 days. I did a little calculation, that's 32% of the year. So the last third of year 2023 is going to be influenced by the biggest planet slowing down in a very marked way. Now, let's just explore Jupiter's themes briefly through its rulership of Sagittarius. So it's growth, optimism, joviality, love of travel, philosophy, higher education, knowledge. Can be to do with trade, international affairs, borders, definitely to do with travel and prosperity. But what about its rulership of Pisces, which I feel tends to get hardly any airtime, if you like. So here, very much an appreciation of spirituality. Religion, in its traditional sense, or any new constructs, and also around healing. I think Jupiter is very important. It's urging us to connect to our higher selves, to be creative, kindly. And people with a Jupiter in Pisces in their natal chart are very likely to be very generous with their time and also their emotional support and empathy. So that's absolutely delicious. But what about Jupiter in Taurus? Well, it's come in and it's asking us to be patient, resilient, determined, go through processes, to stabilize things, be assured in our approach and reliable. The sign of Taurus is very much about stabilizing the early growth that we get. The drama that comes from the sign of Aries with new ideas needs to then be bedded down into something more substantive. And that's what I love about Taurus. So consolidation is a big part of Jupiter in Taurus. So whereas Jupiter can at times overpromise and under-deliver, or kid us that everything's going to be amazing and we won't have to put any work in, which is just not true, we can almost be tricked into switching off a little bit. So I feel that what we're going to need to do over this next third of the year is to be more sustained in our approach. And because of the dramatic impact that Uranus and the North Node squaring up with Saturn had in May of 2022, and then again when we had the Taurus lunar eclipse, which occurred on the 8th of November, that saw Uranus opposing the Sun in Scorpio, the sign of longer term finance, Taurus everyday finance, Uranus instability, squaring up with Saturn in the sign of the collective, Aquarius. And that's when we've really seen this big pushing up of cost, of whether it's borrowing, of rentals, of mortgages, of raw food products, of energy prices. And of course it hasn't been helped one little bit by wider things going on in the world, which, you know, are very political, and that's had an effect on all of us. But I feel that Jupiter in Taurus in its retrograde is asking us to go inwards a little bit more, because Jupiter can be about that spirituality. So the sign of Taurus is about values. It's also about our own relationship to our self-worth. It's not just about the money, but of course we have seen a big contraction around things like Bitcoin, digital currencies, and, you know, whichever way we look at it, raw resources which come out of the earth, Taurus, have become pricier, and we're all just readjusting to that. And of course there are some things that may still yet be to surface, because, as I've mentioned before, because of the subprime crisis in 2008, 2009, big governments have been printing money, quantitative easing to try to keep the stimulus going. Interest rates have been incredibly low, but that meant a lot of financial vehicles were set up that are now unsustainable at higher rates of interest. And then of course we've got the fallout from COVID, which has been hugely expensive because governments to provide central support when finances were already stretched. And then of course we've got what's going on in China, where they've actually got deflation, so they haven't even got growth. I'm sure a lot of people in the Western world would be very happy to have deflation with their groceries, and I would be exactly the same. But in a technical sense, that's not good. So there may be a lot of interconnected financial instruments and products that may appear to be located in China, but there will be investment and investors from other parts of the world. So they've got a real issue with property, and their imports and exports exchanged has become very negative for them. And of course they're the major manufacturer of the world now. So we've got to see how that's going to play out. So what I wanted to do is just share with you briefly the Jupiter retrograde natal chart. And one of the key things about this chart is that we can see the moon, which is exalted in the sign of Taurus, is very close to the position of Jupiter. But they're both in the 5th house, and the 5th house is about risk, chance, enjoying ourselves, being more spontaneous and being a bit more risk-taking. Can also of course be about romance. But I'd just like to share that Venus is in a square with Jupiter. So to be honest, across the 5th and 8th houses, that just suggests that any luxuries that we generally like to indulge in from time to time, we're probably going to find them quite irresistible over this next 3 months, because they can provide a little bit of an escape from some of the reality that we may be dealing with. And the other thing about this chart is the midpoint between the sun and the moon, which is the key influence of this overall chart, is actually in Cancer, which is very much about homes, emotional security, nurture. And it's in the 7th house of how we all relate. So I think that's really helpful that the moon and Jupiter are linking to that midpoint in such a productive way. But also Jupiter and Mercury, the two planets of trade and commerce, are also in a great link. So even though Mercury is in its retrograde and will be through to the 15th of September, it is in a marvellous angle to the position of Jupiter. And Mercury's in house 9, which is very Jupiterian because that's very redolent of the energies of Sagittarius. It's about expansion. So that all looks like our response to Jupiter going retrograde may not be initially noticeable in terms of changing anything we've already been changing, because the financial reality for the last year and a half has been really bruising for some people. But the other thing just to take out of this chart is the position of Saturn. So Saturn is in the 2nd house, very much in keeping with the energy of Taurus, but it's in an opposition with the Sun. Okay, it's a bit broad, about 7.5 degrees, but look where the Sun is. The Sun's in house 9, expansion, and Saturn is in house 2 and in a retrograde, contraction. So I would say when it comes to international trade, that is not a good portent. So as much with this solar event chart, we can see some positive things in there. I think whilst we may have some treats and we are being asked to recreate our financial reality or our approach to our resources more imaginatively, or work on how we feel about ourselves, so we can gain pleasure and extra self-esteem by being very creative. And that's the wonderful thing about Jupiter in the 5th house and in that conjunction with the moon. So it's the things we do at home, whether we put down our devices, we become a bit more playful, particularly if we have children, or do things that really arouse our imagination, paint, play music, read, things that we used to do much more in the old days before we were clutched to these devices all the time. Now let's just have a look at the solar event chart so we can all relate to this collectively. And there it is, Jupiter and the moon in house 2. So very much about an appreciation of good food and good wine if you drink, and even some nice fashion items, all very Tauran, very sensual. But of course we do have Uranus in a retrograde too, and Uranus is going to be going retrograde right through to the 27th of January next year. So because Uranus is here, we have to expect that there will continue to be very changeable conditions. So my proposition on this particular chart is that Saturn moves into house 12, our psychology, the Sun house 6. So in order to keep our spirits up, I think it's important we eat really well. And I think that combination between the moon and Jupiter suggests if we can put the processed foods to one side and cook stuff from scratch more, it's going to feed our souls and our sense of well-being as much as probably being a little bit more economical as well. Now, what about the upcoming transits? Because there are some really important ones. The Sun's angle to Jupiter. It's building up from this event, from the 4th, and it goes on to the 11th within 3 degrees. I've stretched that out a bit at the outset because it's slightly more than 3 degrees from this particular event on the 4th, but by the 8th it's exact. So let's just talk about this. The Sun in the practical earthy sign along with Mercury, the ruler of Virgo. So what they're looking for is tangible progress. They're being discriminating, careful, seeing where they can sift out things that are not relevant, try to find a better, more organised, efficient model. And whereas Jupiter still wise. The wisdom that comes with Jupiter can be incredible. In the steady eddy of Taurus, slowing down, we can still be positive, we can still be enterprising, because that's a word I definitely use for Jupiter. But then we have a whole series of aspects towards the end of October, which are absolutely sizzlers. It starts off with Jupiter opposite Venus. Now, this process begins with Jupiter squaring Venus, saying that we're likely to want to have a few calorific goodies at times in order to keep our spirits up, or a few treats. Now, by the 19th to the 24th of October, they're in opposition. Now, what this can do, I think, is give us a huge desire to be more extravagant, but also perhaps a huge desire for intimacy, because Jupiter in Taurus, very sensual, and of course Venus, although it's in detriment in the sign of Scorpio, it is, you know, very much into sex. So you could encounter someone from the 19th to the 24th, exact on the 22nd, who makes your pulse race, and it may be very difficult to resist them. Now, Jupiter goes opposite Mars from the 24th to the 31st of October, exact on the 28th, the day of the lunar eclipse. Now, that's very self-confident. That's really wanting to strut its stuff without any limitation or any cramping of its style. So that's quite a thrusting influence those two are creating. And then the two planets of trade, which start this process in a wonderful trine, go into an opposition. And of course, oppositions, we get polarity. So Jupiter's in the second house of everyday money, and Venus, Mars and Mercury, the 8th house of the collective, of where we share resources or where we're most invested. So I think for some people, you know, it's going to be quite a steamy last third of October. And then we have the partial lunar eclipse of the 28th of October, but Jupiter is about 6 degrees away. That's not very close. For me, most things were on eclipses particularly. You really need things within no more than about 2 degrees really to be really powerful. As you know, I usually use 3-degree orb. So it's 6 degrees away, but it may be significant in terms of the wider structural environment that we're all living in, because of course Jupiter is about international affairs. So there may be a big reset that's coming at the end of October, and it's very hard to call, because I think that obviously inflation is coming down a bit, but we're still paying way more for goods than we were 2 years ago, so the pain's not any easier. It's just the headline news don't look quite as bad. And the other thing that stood out for me as well is that from the 21st of November to the 1st of December, Jupiter is in a quincunx with the Sun, 150-degree angle, in Sagittarius, the zodiac sign that it rules. And that quincunx could, again, because Sagittarius energy very much about how we all link, you know, the international trade. So that also could push something into the open that could cause some issues. So just to recap, if you're a fixed sign in your natal chart with your sun or your ascendant, and the degree goes between 15 degrees and 5 degrees, you're really going to feel this much more intensely. So that is Taurus, Leo, Scorpio or Aquarius. But we could even go 3 degrees either side. So if you've got something up to 18 degrees and all the way down to 3 degrees, you could come into that grouping as well. Gemini may feel it a bit because Jupiter in the 12th solar house. And obviously, as I've mentioned, with the quincunx, Sagittarius is also a sign that could be influenced by this event, along with Libra through the quincunx. However, there are opportunities with Jupiter, because Jupiter, remember, through its philosophy, is asking us to turn inwards to find that greater value. If things slow down for us, it's to find that creativity that the natal chart says is there for us to behold. It's about trying to reimagine our approach, where We may take more care of our possessions, not buy as many clothes, perhaps buy better clothes, buy clothes from a charity shop that will last longer, so we're not taking part in the consumption cycle in such an intense way. We can, potentially buy our vegetables and fruit and vegetables in a more local way where possible, and push ourselves to find the motivation to cook something completely from scratch. Perhaps we can all, me as well, say, let's come up with 3 new meals that we're going to generate over the next 3 months, and we can chat about it more towards the end. We can see that there can be a big reset coming financially. It is very hard to call because of what may be hidden, and we've been through this before with the subprime crisis, but apparently it's very similar with what's happened in property in China. Of course, if the war in the Ukraine suddenly finished, which at this stage seems a little bit unlikely, but obviously if Putin died, maybe there's a higher chance of a quick finish. That obviously would bring spirits up massively, because that would affect food distribution, which is very much linked to Taurus, and of course Jupiter is international trade. So you can see that whether we want to travel with Jupiter's help, we want to buy, eat and consume food, nice fashions, spend money on some luxuries, very Jupiter in Taurus, or we want to find ways to sweat our assets a little bit more keenly and a little bit more shrewdly. There are things we can do despite the fact that Jupiter goes through this retrograde. Please stay with me now as I go through each of the 12 signs to give you a summary of what you can expect. So Aries, it may seem a little bit of a disappointing message, but it's more of the same. The more astute that you can manage your resources, the more thrifty you can be, the better that you're going to work with this slowdown. But there is a wonderful opportunity to also reimagine your talents, your attributes and your skills and find outlets for them. For example, if you are a maker or a creator, you can be inspired over this next 3-month period. It's possible that perhaps you're going to teach someone some of your tricks of the trade, so to speak, which could turn out to be very enjoyable. So if you do join up with a group of others on a shared interest or hobby, I think it can be really gratifying and actually turn out to be a lot of fun. So sometimes we can look at our situation and compare how it used to be to, say, 2 years ago, and think that in lots of ways we don't have the same scenario, which can be true, and obviously sometimes we need to grieve through that. But also it's important to try to get back into the moment, the present, which you've got an enormous gift for, to make use of the time you have got to bring that ingenuity to bear. So yes, money may still need some care, but that doesn't mean to say that you can't actually still make some progress. And that's what Jupiter's very much about. It is about progress. Don't see this retrograde as being intrinsically unlucky. It's just looking at things in a different way and using the knowledge that we can download from everywhere these days to help you, to help your situation in a really fundamental way. Taurus, I'd like you to think back to the middle of May, the 17th to be precise, because that's when Jupiter pitched up in your sign. Now think of then, that point, and now, what has changed? Because Jupiter, when it visits roughly around about every 12 years, brings its potential for expansion. It brings a special moment. It's a cycle, a wonderful opportunity to burst forwards in a really dynamic way. And I will tell you, in the first 3 months of 2024, Jupiter and Saturn, which obviously have very different energies, are actually collaborating fantastically well. So if there is something that you've put in motion since the middle of May, perhaps you've given yourself a makeover, perhaps you've taken up a new interest, perhaps you've been a bit more assertive about your individual needs in a situation, you may go through a period of just, in some ways, just checking out that you're on the right track. And some of those new strands, or the strands that you've reinvigorated with more passion and energy, may not go forwards quite at the speed you would like with this Jupiter retrograde. But remember, with the moon in your sign, basically the moon in Taurus is its second favourite location in its whole cycle. So that moon and Jupiter is very buoyant. And of course, in the natal chart, the 5th house, very expressive. You also have Uranus there as well. So lots of energy is urging you on to keep the faith, keep working at things. And I feel that you will see the hard work you put in from now through to the end of the year. I guarantee by the end of the month of March 2024, you will see significant progress. There's a fantastic event coming up on the 23rd of May next year, and that can be supremely fortunate for you. And then once Jupiter moves into your 2nd house on the 26th of May, you can start to gain extra money and also an extra sense of self-worth and identity for all that you're investing now. So the 1st house, where Jupiter is for you, is the start of the journey. It's not necessarily where we reap the rewards. And that's why it's important to create the context of Jupiter. But that doesn't mean to say that you can't still make enormous progress. So Gemini, for you, Jupiter moved on the 17th of May into the 12th house of your situation. Very much to do with spirituality, contemplation, giving ourselves the opportunity to heal, to take time out in nature and find the ways in which we can meditate and just really tune in to a higher purpose within our being. And you're going to have more of this right through to the end of the year, but it can just get that much more profound. When planets go retrograde, their attributes can actually be amplified. And I think in Taurus, it's a very safe holder for Jupiter. It's very steady and not so flamboyant perhaps, but if you can take a breath, if you can find ways to create a little bit more space and time and tranquility, or go on retreats, or have some healing massages, any kind of natural medicines or holistic medicines are going to be incredibly attractive to you from now to the end of the year, and indeed right through to when Jupiter enters your sign on the 26th of May next year. But if you find yourself rethinking some of your higher philosophies, or things have been shifting anyway, you could find the momentum of that actually increases with this retrograde, not slows down. It's all about growing your higher consciousness. That's really what this retrograde is about. So Cancer, just think back to when Uranus entered Taurus in March of 2019 and what's changed in your situation since then. I think you've probably made some very radical decisions, maybe ones that have surprised people who've seen you as someone who really has a strong understanding of continuity, security. You may have done something that's more daring. You may have taken a more radical direction. You may have developed a whole new friendship group. And I feel that what Jupiter retrograde is going to do is see you think about all of this and think about it very carefully. Jupiter is about knowledge. It's possible, because it is the planet of travel, that you may go away with a group of people in the last third of this year, or right through to when Jupiter moves into your 12th house on the 26th of May next year. But the reason why I feel that this next 3 months is particularly important is that if you do go away with people, yes, it could be that you're going to have some great fun and some high jinks, but I think it's just as possible that there may be a bigger motive. You know, it could be that you head off with people who have a shared hobby, an interest, that you all can unite around a cause that inspires you. So that deeper side of Jupiter is really calling out around your friendship circle, the way you socialize, your longer term life plan. And I think some of the more switchable and changeable and chaotic energies that's come from Uranus can in some ways be smoothed out, and you can use the knowledge base of Jupiter to make sense of what's been going on in a big way the last 4 years. So Leo, for you, one of the things that comes up for me could be about professional skills and changing your knowledge base in order to deal with the fast changing world we live in. Uranus has already made it a very unsettled place at times for you over the last 4 years, but one that's possibly also promoted some unexpected and lightning quick choices which have proved very exciting, if at times rather breathless. So potentially a lot of change, or a lot of to-ing and fro-ing, or not quite sure about what you want from your professional slot, because Jupiter can be very much about reflection through its rulership of Pisces, knowledge through Sagittarius. I feel that you could reflect on how you could modify your skill set in order to make you more attractive to a potential employer. It's also possible, if you work for yourself, that Jupiter slowing down in the 10th house means that, yes, there could be the potential that you will need to find some new clients and customers, and it points towards potentially those people from coming further afield, or something linked to a training organisation or a higher educational establishment, or something to do with publishing or the digital scene. But Jupiter going retrograde gives you lots of opportunities. It's going to help you to sort of not get so caught up in the big promise, which can come from Jupiter, and it's more about the big consolidation with growth. So steadying, but still being open to opportunities, which is what Jupiter is about. So Virgo, for you, Jupiter going retrograde is in the part of your situation to do with travel, the 9th house, adventure, independence. That rather scattery energy of Uranus has been really provoking you to make some massive changes over the last 4 years, and you've probably made some, and it's been quite exhilarating at times. But if you are hoping to actually go somewhere abroad, I think you will have to have a solid plan. I don't think it's quite like Mercury retrograde. I mean, we are obviously going to have another Mercury retrograde later this year, which goes across Capricorn and also briefly in the last week Sagittarius as well. But I feel essentially for you, the next 3 months could be a time when you do rethink your whole wider approach to life, because that is your philosophies. So as much as Jupiter is linked to travel, being very free-spirited and independent, I get all that, but I feel that you can use the knowledge base just as strongly as experiencing the physical delights of exploring, getting out in nature. You can do those things, but I feel it will particularly be beneficial for you if you're doing something different. So what your life is craving out for with Jupiter's help is stimulation, variety, a freshness, but it needs to be in a way that works for you financially, because they're both, you're an earth sign, your ruler Mercury, the sun angling brilliantly to this Jupiter position. So whatever you do, even if it's enterprising, it still needs to have a tangible benefit or results. So your pragmatism is a fantastic part of your core being. I think Jupiter in the 9th house is definitely asking you, don't let your pragmatism pulverize your passion, but at the same time, your passion needs to be measured. But if it's not possible due to your circumstances to do something that's more daring, free-spirited, buccaneering, all very 9th house stuff that we would get from Jupiter, and you have to be very realistic, you can still find ways to reimagine your approach to situations, which brings in some change, because that's essentially your appreciation of order and making sure that things work well needs in some ways to be challenged, and Jupiter in its thoughtful way in its retrograde could come up with something for you if you apply yourself to the available opportunity and download it from Jupiter. and that can be very helpful to you to make some adjustments to the core of your situation, which is often very well worked out. So Libra, for you, Jupiter going retrograde in the 8th house. The 8th house is where we're most devoted. It's where we want to be intimate. It can be where we want to put our longer term money, you know, whether it's your pension or it's some savings, whether it's working with some spare cash that you've created through some kind of entrepreneurial thing. Jupiter in the 8th house is just saying stay a little bit more on the conservative side of your approach, the retrograde, to be honest, I feel. But it doesn't mean to say there aren't opportunities, and that thrilling set of influences in the last 10 days of October could definitely see you drawn towards somebody who's got a magnetism about them, an intensity that really sits up and makes you take notice. Yes, you can be very much attracted to how people look and dress because you really appreciate class and the way people appear. But I feel that this 8th house energy is asking you to dive deep. Maybe even because of the knowledge of Jupiter, get a lot more aware of mysticism, anything to do, if you're someone who really loves crime books and those series you get on the TV, 24 hours in police custody and things like that, they can be really gripping because they help us to get underneath, to understand some of the very dark parts of human nature. So I think you could find yourself fascinated by all of this over the next 3 months. But if you're in a relationship, for example, where you're just not getting that real connection, I think Jupiter could see you crave for that. And of course, the 8th house can be what makes way that no longer serves our greater good. So Scorpio, Jupiter going retrograde in the 7th house. Really a lot of emphasis there on how you relate. Jupiter about knowledge, also about expanding on knowledge. Can be about travel with someone special, one person in particular. You've got that big collective in your sign, really exciting in the last half, starting with Mars on the 12th of October, moving into Scorpio, obviously your home ruling traditional planet. But those last 10 days, wow, really, really intense stuff. And of course the lunar eclipse, which occurs in your opposite sign, which is pretty close to Jupiter. So I think if you're trying to balance what you want as an individual with what you're prepared to give to someone else and what you expect from them, whether it's in a business partnership, a friendship, or in a love affair, I think the latter part of October is really fated. And it's going to be very interesting how it turns out for you. But also, I think Jupiter retrograde in your 7th house could magic up someone into your life that's not in your life at the present time. And it could turn out to be someone really, really significant. Because Jupiter is a very powerful influence. I think it's characterized by a lot of YouTube astrologers, to be honest. It's very binary, that Jupiter's amazing, that Saturn's really dark and difficult. I actually don't believe that. I think they both bring different things to the celestial party. And Jupiter retrograde could be asking you to just rethink your relationship with yourself. You know, if you're not in one, or you may not want a relationship, but you still have a relationship to yourself. I used to live on my own for years. I was always having arguments with myself. I did not say that. You did. You did say that. Only joking, but well, not really. But we do have a relationship with ourselves. So that may be something you're going to revisit over this 3-month period. But that flash of excitement that occurs in the last 10 days of October could be a tipping point in the relationship which needs a bit of a shove to get it really sparked up and going. Or it could be that it's a tipping point the other way because you're becoming more mindful of what you want as an individual. It just depends. But your knowledge around relationships will grow between now and the end of this year. So Sagittarius, for you, Jupiter is your ruler. House 6 is where we need to be mindful of things like diet. And obviously the sign of Taurus is very much about food, but I'm talking about nutrition. I'm talking about how much energy we can upload from our particular way of consuming food. And because Jupiter's about knowledge and you have an incredible thirst for gaining knowledge, I think you are going to become much more insightful around diet, exercise, and perhaps around your work situation. But Jupiter in the 6th house is also a bit redolent of the energies of Virgo, where Jupiter is detrimented, because of course it rules the sign of Pisces, and in Virgo it also squares up your sign, which is the domiciliary ruler of. So what I would say is, don't promise more than you can realistically deliver. So it's all very well being a good person and covering for colleagues and doing that much more, doing extra shifts and all the rest of it, but do look after your welfare. But your love of learning things could also give you some new credentials that actually makes you more employable. And I think a line manager or a colleague can actually be very grateful for your wisdom from now through to the end of the year. So Capricorn, Jupiter going retrograde in house 5. House 5 is the house of play, of sociability. Jupiter can be exuberant, bubbly, great fun, and perhaps, you know, that part of you that when you were younger tended to be a tad serious, that's probably made way over time. You need to be with people who amuse you, so they're quite earthy in their approach. But of course Uranus has made your romantic and social situation quite changeable at times in the last 4 years. Jupiter retrograde could see you thinking a lot about your talents, I feel. So that social situation may be calmed a little bit, but I feel that what this can encourage you to do is think about where your gifts lie, you know, the flair and artistry that you have, the panache. Think about your panache and take it seriously, because as you go into next year, Capricorn, for the first 3 months, your ruling planet Saturn is collaborating with Jupiter in an incredible way. If you take your talent seriously, you'll be able to articulate with real clarity, but also an authority, what you can develop and evolve your talents now in this 3-month period. And honestly, as you go into next year, there's a real window of celestial opportunity for you to burst forwards and shine. So if there are a few things that just slow down, if your love life, for example, doesn't look very dynamic, well, do remember that Jupiter's forging that great link to the midpoint in Cancer, which is opposite your sign. So keep the faith. What you're looking for with Jupiter retrograde, in essence, is actually sincerity beneath the claims, because Jupiter can be very much about claiming things, but delivering on the claim can be more difficult, whereas Jupiter retrograde is much more likely to see it in keeping with the more shrewd and realistic strands that exist in your heart and in your soul on an everyday basis. So Aquarius, Jupiter going retrograde in house 4, 4th house, home, hearth, emotion, security, relating, nurture, feeling that we might be enterprising from our home office, work from home, whatever we want to call it. Family, do you want a nipper to come into your world? This could be a time when you really start to think about it seriously. And remember, Jupiter's in that square with Venus as this begins. It's also in the 5th house. That's nice. Maybe something's going to occupy your time to do with looking after someone within your family, their needs. Jupiter in the 4th house, you know, can bring a lot of reassurance, I feel. The chaotic energy of our modern ruler of Uranus, the last 4 years, oh my word. You know, it's just been absolutely constant electrification of home and emotional matters. So Jupiter in the very sensible Taurus in retrograde can slow things down, bring a more peaceful, more calming dimension to bear. Perhaps you won't want to be going out and being quite as interactive and sociable. But if you're wanting peace and tranquility and a greater sense of stability, I think the next 4 months offers some rich possibilities. So Pisces, for you, Jupiter, of course, is your lovely traditional ruler. And because it starts off this process in house 3 for you, this is about your ideas, your connection with neighbours, siblings, your interactions with people on a daily basis, text messages, emails, anything to do with the digital age, domestic appliances, 3rd house, all that kind of good stuff. And Jupiter, of course, can be about growth. So it may feel in some ways that things will slow down a little bit. But you know, life rattles along at such a pace. I don't know what you think, but I can't believe where the year's gone. So if Jupiter slows down a bit to give you the chance to take a breath and think a bit more about your ideas, 3rd house, belief systems, 3rd house, to take the time to catch up on your correspondence with people you've not been able to be in touch with for a while. I know Mercury's in a retrograde as well at this time, but I feel that if there has been something that's been a bit blocked since Mercury's last retrograde, that could be resolved even over the next week or so before Mercury goes direct on the 15th of September. So see this as an opportunity really to give yourself a little bit of time just to think, breathe, you know, just indulge some of your interest if there's something that particularly stimulates you, whether it's crosswords, puzzles, Sudoku, playing chess, all these things, very 3rd house. If you have been thinking about getting a new mode of transport, I probably would wait for Mercury to go direct, to be fair, but Jupiter retrograde could give you the opportunity to do a lot of research, because knowledge, Jupiter can be to do with travel. You may feel in the mood to do more short journeys, but if you do need to visit your mode of transport, and you've often been tempted by, say, an electric bike, I mean, we got some second hand, great fun, until the battery packed in on a hill. Oh my word, they're so heavy, but what you get is very quick movement, and you still pedal, so it's good for your heart. And where we live, in deepest rural Wales, terrific. So 3rd house, very much to do with short journeys, can be to do with cycling, walking, that kind of thing. So you could think about your ideas, your belief systems, your connections to people around you. Jupiter's about faith as well, and it's about having a bit more trust, and it's about also being sincere about what we do say, and not just saying the first thing that comes into our mind, because the 3rd house can be a bit like that. So lots of things to go for. And just to say, the first 3 months of next year, Saturn in your sign, which I know is in a retrograde at the moment, and if you're born in the first few degrees of Pisces, you've probably really been feeling it this year. Well, Saturn and Jupiter forge an amazing link for the first 3 months of 2024, so lots to look forward to. So whatever you're thinking about or adapting or changing or learning about at the moment, believe me, it's all for your greater good. It's been a real pleasure being with you. Thank you so much for joining me. Please like, comment, share or subscribe. But for now, stay safe and all the best.